Navigating the world of spirituality can be a confusing and frustrating thing to do on your own. Sometimes it helps to hear other people's stories, where they've come, where they're headed, and the lessons they've learned along the way. That's where I come in. My name's Andrea, and this is Magic from the Root. It's a witchy podcast where I'll discuss all things magic, spirituality, and anything in between. I'll be talking spells, tarot, and crystals, angels and ancestors, how your earth body deserves to give and receive pleasure, and I'll be explaining what I mean by the creative cauldron that sits at the center of your core and how you can access it. I'm going to be interviewing my coven sisters and sharing their stories with you, as well as anyone else that I see walking their spiritual path with a whole lot of pride and excitement. Because really, when we tap into what we came here to do and we find our ways of connecting with spirit, we shine bright in the world. And I want everyone to be able to access that with no shame whatsoever. So if you're ready to start your journey, or you're well on your way and you just want a little bit of community, this is your place to be. So I invite you to grab a cup of tea, sit back, relax, open your heart, open your mind, and get ready, because we're going to talk about some magic. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Magic from the Root. I am Andrea, your lovely host, and today I'm super excited to do yet another interview with one of the most fabulous people in my life. Today you will be meeting B. B uses they, she pronouns and is an indigiqueer human of mixed descent, living in the Portland area like myself. B and I have known each other for, I'm not even sure how many years now. Do you know how many?
I don't know, like 7?
Yeah, something like 7. I would describe B as kind of a walker between worlds. Someone who is beyond wise for their years, who is crafty and wild and fun and quiet at times. I had the amazing gift of living with B for a while and felt really blessed to be in a house that was with other witches and to just share space with people who shared a similar spiritual path. And I got to see B play with fire and play with plants and play in the spirit realms, and I'm still really grateful that we get to do that in Coven all the time. So that is my impromptu intro for B today, and I'm gonna start by asking B what you're drinking.
I am drinking the Gypsy Cold Care tea.
Nice.
Yep. Standard.
I am as well, actually. That's so funny that you chose it too.
Yeah.
I added a little mugwort to mine because it seemed quite apropos for what we'll be talking about today. But I actually really love this tea. I feel like it is I'm drinking it for the flavor because I feel like it's such a good combination of herbs in there. It's so delicious.
Yeah, it's my favorite tea.
Oh, nice.
For sure. Yeah, pre-made teas that come in a bag. Caveat, there's all kinds of tea. But yeah, I love it all year round for sure.
Yeah, it's a good one. So before we get started with all the many questions about you and your practice and your life, is there anything that you would like to say about yourself or anything that you would like to do to open space for today?
Yeah. Usually to create space, I work with sound the most, but a lot of that is like if I'm by myself, it's just kind of strange noises, half in my head, half out loud. Maybe for this podcast and the two of us just doing some breath work and presencing in our body, and if there's sounds that need to come out to clear the way, then they can do that.
Yeah.
That's going to be weird to do on a podcast, but I'm down for it.
I'm down too. You know, I'm always down for something random.
Just closing our eyes and bringing our attention inward with our breath, breathing in and bringing that presence to the core of our bodies, our solar plexus, and our lungs. Breathing out any stagnant energy. And as we continue to breathe in and out, just kind of repeating that process of bringing in everything that we need that is abundant in this universe all around us, and breathing out that which we don't need anymore, that needs to go back into the cycle of things, making whatever sounds come with that. Realizing I also do a lot of shaking around while I do this.
I do too. Especially of the neck and head for me.
Neck, head, shoulders.
Hi.
Hi.
What's your day been today?
Today's been okay. In school right now. I go to PSU for psychology and Indigenous studies, and I had mostly homework today for that. A lot of reading. That's mostly been my day. So very calm, cuddling with my cat, reading.
Grady.
Yeah. Yes, Grady.
I gotta give props to Grady right now, because Grady's like an old fat cat, like a little old lady cat, and she is hilarious.
She's the best. Everyone falls in love with her. She's had many roommates over the years, and everyone loves Grady.
Yeah,
She's great.
Not a cat person. I'm always like, ugh, fucking cats. And Grady is, I mean, on like one hand, slightly annoying, but because Grady can be annoying, but also like so damn cute.
Yeah, she's really pushy, but she's really charming about it, so yeah, it's fine.
It's really funny. And she's like got this poochy belly. She's really, well, she's so funny. I'm excited to talk to B because, I mean, I gotta start by saying, like, as usual, I'm gonna jump all over the place, and none of this is gonna make sense, but y'all follow me because you're used to this. But when I first met B, and you and I met originally through the Women's Mysteries group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and which I've talked about on a couple of different episodes in season 1. Interviewed Danielle Renee in season 1, who led Women's Mystery Group. And I remember when I met B, and you know, B is like 15, literally exactly 15 years younger than me. And I was like, who is this human? Because I'm, on one hand, fascinated by them, and on the other hand, terrified. Because, not because you're like a scary person, like B is not scary by any means, but that I was like, I could tell that you were so connected to spirit. Just something about just you being you, and I was intimidated by you. And instantly was like, I don't know who this is, but they're amazing. And I said this in the intro, but you're like wise beyond your years. And one of the things that several of us in Coven will always say is like, oh, if there's ever anything that seems we're having debate about or questions about, or people are feeling unsure, like we always know we can ask you for like, what's your viewpoint on this? And that you'll come from like this very emotionally grounded place that kind of has so much depth and wisdom to it, that is this like looking at the bigger picture. You just are such a solid human in that way. And yeah, and so, you know, then Emily, who I'll interview later this year, Emily and I had started doing like deeper and deeper spirit work together as we like then branched out and were having more people come into the mix and starting the Coven. I was like, we have to have B. We have to have B. Like I was adamant about having B come into the mix because I just knew you would add this like really powerful element, but also this is going to sound really weird, but like this pure element to the group. If that makes any sense. I don't know.
I'm blushing right now.
I know.
That's so cute.
I'm like fangirling over B right now. Yeah. It's hilarious. Yeah, but I feel like, so I'm really excited to interview you because you have, and that's why I feel like this episode is so perfect for this time of year right now, right? We're getting close to Samhain. We're in this very liminal time. We're, you know, and I actually have so many questions about this for you, which is really interesting. But, you know, so much of the magic and the medicine that you bring into the world is around what I would call death magic, and what you're now kind of moving into being more liminal magic and like a different definition of that. All that being said, I guess brings me back to like, I've been fangirling over B for forever because I've just like could feel your connection to spirit. And so I'm really excited for you to share kind of what your path has been and what that's looked like for you. Because I think for you, it's, as is true for a lot of people, right? It's going to start like the minute you were born.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I would love for you to, if you feel like you can, maybe break down like what has been your spiritual path in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Wow, that was such a lovely intro. Yeah, I mean, it did start like when I was tiny, before I can remember, I don't know, the moment I was born, I guess. But there's definitely layers to that. Like I feel like I could identify, it wasn't really until my 20s and really a little bit before you met me that I started like consciously practicing what I would call witchcraft. Mm-hmm. But I've been doing something in that realm and been very connected to spirits and like a, I don't know, creator my whole life. I think the beginning of that for me is always comes back to trees. And plants in general and just the whole plant world, but trees and like mountains in particular are nature beings that I've always just felt very at home with and have always talked to and listened to and have been this really guiding force in my life. And I think that maybe gets into some of the liminal, like shadow realms. They're these really massive beings that are kind of larger than human comprehension. and yet we get to see and experience them, and they reach down into the underworld of the earth and like into the core of the earth and bring forth what life is there onto the surface, and kind of hold that gate for us in some ways. So yeah, I think it really started there and has just been kind of a weird and winding path to where I am now that includes Christianity in a strange way. I was sort of raised in the Lutheran Church, but in a family with a lot of emphasis on critical thinking and personal belief. But I definitely grew up going to church, and like one of my fathers and his father were Lutheran pastors, and for the time that we were really involved with St. Mark's is the church I grew up going to, my mom did a lot of the floral arrangements and the seasonal banners and stuff like that. So we were at church all the time. And our church, I feel like I really lucked out. They're some of the pastors there, I think, is what informed this, are really into art. And so we had all of these...
That's cool. Just
beautiful art everywhere. And like the altar and our main cross were made by one of my favorite artists. His name's Harold Blaze. He's a metal artist.
How interesting.
Yeah, which I do metal work, so there's a tie in there.
Yeah,
for sure. He's a big artistic influence on my life.
That's cool.
There's like a family lore that one art walk when I was, I don't know, 10 or something, I asked him for his autograph, and it was like zoom out real weird. I'm this little girl like asking this random artist that only people in Spokane have heard of, or, you know, people who are into that kind of art. He was thrilled. He's like absolutely sure. But anyway, yeah, so there's just a lot of beauty around me, and my mother is an artist and father is an artist, and I'm an artist and grew up with that, and that was really encouraged through the church, and that's another way that I access my spirituality is through artistic creation.
I love that.
Yeah, so I think I lucked out there that there was some pressuring that I rejected and rebelled against, absolutely, but I also got to see and experience beauty and ritual, because Christianity can be very ritualistic.
Very full of ritual,
yeah. And it was always my favorite to go to our Blessing of the Animals service, where we got to bring our dogs. Or
what?
Not my dogs, but...
Seriously?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, I love that
some
your church
churches
did
don't
that.
do this, but yeah, ours, again, the head pastor, he's a dog freak. He's real into dogs.
I love that, though.
And yeah, so we'd bring in all of the animals, and I would like bring my rats in, and then like Christmas service was really beautiful.
Sorry, I'm just in my brain. I'm like picturing everyone like loading in with their. It's because you're like, I've got my rats, and they've got their dogs, and the horse, and I'm just.
No horses,
like
no
Noah's
barn
Ark
animals,
stepping up
but
in
yeah,
there.
yes, they're like parakeets and cats.
That's hilarious.
And hamsters, and everyone bringing their pets to church.
Oh my God,
once a year.
I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I got lucky in that sense, and my parents are philosophical thinkers. There's a lot of talking that happened in my house of like what is happening out there in the greater universe, and what is the meaning of life, and like I don't know, some of those grander questions that I think lead to a sense of spirituality, or they can.
There's more depth to, like, it's not just dogma, it's like you're actually really thinking about what is this really big picture mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I had thoughts about things pretty early that would not be shaken, and that was...
Such as?
fairies are real, for sure.
Yes.
And plants talk, and I had a really deep affinity with rabbits for a long time, and had a few experiences where, like, I was semi-lost in the woods, or maybe actually lost, but unwilling to admit it, and was, like, let out by rabbits.
That is like straight up fairy tale right there.
Yes.
Yeah. Because fairies are real, and plants do talk, and literally this is why I'm like,
because
Bee's amazing.
I'm Snow White.
Because Bee literally, like, came out of a fairy tale. That's badass.
I mean, yeah. And that, at the time, that was not the context I had for it. It was just like, oh, cool, a rabbit, I'm going to follow it. Like, oh, and here's the path. I guess I was kind of lost, but just wandering around and being a kid.
And the chances of coming across a rabbit who's going to take you to the path. Like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, rabbits do hang out around me. Animals in general. I'm definitely that person who people are like, oh, they usually never like humans. They like me.
I would love to know, like, what was your parents, like, how did your parents respond to your dynamics around, like, fairies are real and I talk to the plants, and clearly you weren't saying it in this way when you're a small child, but I imagine it was such an active part of who you were that it somehow came up. Did they have any responses to that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think some of the more active, I was hearing and seeing things that I wasn't necessarily talking about because of what had happened with my brother and siblings. So I have a family that has a lot of mental health issues, and two of my brothers are schizophrenic. I think I learned very early, like, pre-verbal,
wow,
to, like, that there was something off with, like, presenting in such a way that you could see or hear things that other people could not see or hear.
Right.
That was a problem. So I learned very early to pay attention to, like, are other people showing signs that they are hearing what I'm hearing? And if no, then I think I just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
But I know that, like, I supposedly had a lot of imaginary friends, and I was very creative. I think mostly was understood by my parents as, like, I'm just really imaginative, and how great for a young artist to be so imaginative and have this, like, rich inner world.
It's so interesting. And if at any point you feel like you don't want to move further down that path around talking about mental health stuff, then please feel free to let me know, because we can pause or we can stop. But I feel like it's such a crucial conversation that clearly we're not going to go into deep depths around. That could be like a whole separate podcast in and of itself. But I find it fascinating that, like, with your parents, to know that there is this, you know, like, history with other siblings, and that in you it's more, and partly because like you said, at, like, a pre-verbal age, which is insane. It's crazy to me how, and poor choice of words there, but, like, you know, it's, like, wild to think about how children at such a very young age already kind of know what is and is not appropriate, you know, quote unquote appropriate, and, like, what is and is not safe in certain ways, and that they will modify their behavior. But also, I guess where I'm going with this is, like, so interesting that your parents, knowing that, would kind of see it as, like, oh, it's so artistic, and, like, this wealth of creativity, or this well of creativity for B to kind of access and play within and be with. And then on the other side, other siblings being viewed as having problems, in quotes here again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think some of that is just the dynamics of my family, and that like those siblings are technically they're my half siblings, and it's like I was not raised around them, so the parents that raised me aren't really their parents. And I think before my mom was involved with my siblings, they already had this label because of just dynamics with that family.
Yeah.
And I didn't. And then I was removed from that family pretty young.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think there's some of that's just, I just got really lucky in the timing and not having some of those same stigmas, but then also learning how to hide from having this example, and how to mask certain behaviors.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, the mental health conversation is definitely part of this, and I think something that I wish there was more conversation around, that like intersection of being a spiritual person and also navigating mental health, and what is going on there when like I'm hearing voices and have this family with a history of schizophrenia, but here I am saying that no, it's just the trees.
Right. Well, and I was gonna say, as well, like so many people who are like really connected with spirit and can have entities that visit them and can have, I'm like, my words are not coming to me right now, but like angels and entities and all sorts of other beings that they engage with. And when you have that from a young age and you don't know how to differentiate, or that you should differentiate of like, oh, this is what I see, but not everyone else sees this. How many people, I just wonder like how many people grow up with a stigma of mental illness when really they're just so energetically wide open. Where is the line? And I'm not asking you to answer that, right? Like, because I think that's like an impossible question to answer, but like my brain is kind of going to that place of like, wow, how many people in their life have been stigmatized for just not having a guide in their life or another person in their life to be like, oh, what you're seeing and experiencing is actually real and you're not crazy. Or, like, here's how you can put protections up so you're not having like a lot of the stuff that's coming at you that you can't figure out.
Yeah.
Engage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
A lot. And I think that's something that I'm still learning to let go of. Like, I run into that in my own head all the time, and I've had to do a lot of work around that to get comfortable with being a magical practitioner, is unpacking and kind of deprogramming that thinking of like, oh, am I crazy? Or are people going to think that I'm crazy and then do something to me? So like a phobia I had for a long time was this like fear of being committed.
Which would make a whole hell of a lot of sense considering.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot there for me that's like, there's past life stuff and there's this family stuff or this life stuff that it makes sense that was a phobia I had.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's no clear answers there, and it's different for everyone, right? And I think the mental health and like professional psych world is shifting right now, and there's this change from being very really negative and pathological about mental health and shifting away from this saying that things are an illness, or that there's like something wrong happening here, and trying to focus more on like, well, is this how is the individual experiencing it? Is it a problem for them? And if the answer is no, then okay, there's nothing to fix here. This is just how they work. And moving towards this more acceptance of individuals rather than this cookie cutter vision of what a healthy person is supposed to function like.
How do we make everyone look like Dick and Jane?
Yeah. Right. And that's, that's in all sorts of realms that we're having that reckoning right now.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, seriously.
Besides kind of going back to your path in general, like any other phases that you went through, like after the church, which was so like lovely, actually, it sounds like, and artsy and
yeah, I mean, that's how it is when I look back at it, and I can see the incredible like luck and privilege that I had there. Certainly my experience of it at the time, I was like an angsty preteen and teenager, and I didn't want to be doing confirmation, and I didn't want to be at church, and I was doing the whole rebel against the stepdad thing a little bit there, and although that's that's like never who he's my dad, that's who he's always been, but that was part of it. But anyway, I think at the time my experience of that was not all that spiritual. Like I would not have said that was like me having a spiritual experience, but it all informs who you become.
Absolutely.
But that was also around that time I'm like, getting into playing with fire and making potions that I didn't really know that's what I was doing. And I just, was really into books and movies about witches for no reason, and like draw chalk circles around myself and just like sit and chant stuff. And I'm like totally not, I don't know. So something that I do is it's like it's a stim thing for me, that I talk to myself in like inconsistent made up language, that seems to be, if I were to record myself, it kind of shifts with what languages I'm most exposed to or am like most thinking about at the time, or I kind of hyperfixate on languages sometimes, and I'll go down these rabbit holes of watching a lot of YouTubes or listening to audios of people just speaking in different languages.
I totally didn't know that about you. I love that.
Yeah. So I think that just kind of comes out in this like garbledy-gook. Sometimes there's actual words that I can parse out, but I think that's mostly what I was doing, or I just felt more comfortable sitting in a chalk circle, because I lived in a basement and had a concrete floor. Yeah. So I'd like pull the little like area carpet back and just sit in a chalk circle, because that felt more comfortable. But like, I'm not a witch, not at all.
Not at all. People do that all the time. What are you talking about? In their basement.
Totally.
It's super common.
Yeah, so like looking back, I was also getting into that realm of, I don't know, what people would probably think of as more witchy spirituality, whatever that means.
I would say so. Just a little bit.
Yeah. But candle magic, that's something that I got into, and I know that's something that like people have a lot of rules around. Like, I know there are practitioners of candle magic that there's like very specific colors and things that you do, and I've never done that. Sometimes I'll get specific hits on like, oh, I should use this color candle, but for the most part it's just about the fire.
I mean, that's the most potent piece of it, really.
Yeah.
There is, in season 1, just because I'm going to throw this out there right now, we did do an episode that was all about candle magic, which is a lot of, like, goes into the specifics of it. But really what it does always come back to is it's about using that fire element as a source of, I'm trying to really mind my words here. I want to say a source of power, but I'm like, oh, that sounds so wrong in this moment.
Yeah. I always feel like it's it's the same as working with crystals or with a particular incense or with wands or whatever. It's like another partner in the process.
Yeah. It's wielding energy and co-creating with it.
Yeah. There you go.
That's a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was definitely doing just like reckless teen stuff. Had my own creepy experience with a Ouija board, and
yeah. Do you want to share about that? You totally don't have to, but I kind of, the reason I love to ask about like the things gone wrong, because those stories I feel like are always, one, very interesting, and two, always, don't do this at home, kids.
Yeah.
Like, here's yet another reminder. Don't do it like this.
Yeah.
But you also don't have to share.
There were other folks involved, and we weren't at my house, and I haven't like asked if they're cool with this story being like public. So I'll refrain, but the general gist was we were teenagers fucking around with a Ouija board, and shit got more real than we were expecting it to in my friend's creepy basement that we definitely knew was haunted. So.
Yeah, yet again, another reason, don't ever buy Ouija boards for children.
Yeah, just don't.
Like,
please don't.
They're not games.
Yeah.
It always surprises me when I'm like, what are people doing? This is not fun and games.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe this is an experience people have of me where they see me and they're like, whoa, she powerful. I don't know, because now I'm looking back at this experience of middle school, and it was always that like B talks to ghosts and our basement is haunted, and so B should probably check that out. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I know what I'm doing, as if I have any training at all.
You're like, sounds like a plan.
It's like, you got a portal, I can close it. I don't know what that means, but I can close it for sure. Yeah, so we opened a portal, but it's okay, I closed it. Really jankily, it took years, but we did it.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and then after that, I went to art school and got more into that. I think I got real jaded for a bit, and I got very depressed, and I stopped being able to like feel as much.
Yeah.
Which is where forever my life is this dance of like magic and brain chemistry, because I have these like very depressive periods throughout my life that I get very numb and very disassociated. And so the experience stops being in my body and stops feeling human, and so I think in those periods I'm still connected to creator spirit of some form, but I'm just not present to have that experience. And the older I've gotten and the more I've paid attention to what it feels like when I disassociate, so that's something I've had to work on in therapy and am still working on. But I've noticed that I still have that feeling of being connected and held, but I'm just like, I'm not in my body. So it's very different. Let's see. How does that connect to my journey?
Well, I feel like that's huge. I feel like that's a huge piece of it. And sorry, I just interrupted you there, but I want to just thank you for your honesty first and foremost, because I know there's a lot of people who would not be willing to kind of talk about this and share this openly, but I know that it's important for you, and I know that it's important for other people out there to be able to have some honest conversations around mental health and depression and all of the things that are actually real dynamics that people are dealing with all the fucking time. And I know, like, from knowing you for so long, there's been multiple times where you have kind of, in one way or another, said, man, life is much easier as a tree. You know, like it would be so much easier if you could just be a tree. And it makes sense, right? Like, when you describing your depressive moments to me right now in this exact moment, I'm like, oh, that makes so much even though I understood it previously for a different reason, like, it makes even more sense to me now, because I think your connection with the trees and how they've always been there with you, and they're so much bigger than these, like, crazy human, emotional, weird dynamics that we get ourselves into, that there's it makes sense to me that you would still have a connection with them in those depressive moments, and that also they, in some way, because they're like so much more grand, and our wild emotional fluctuations in some way seem so much like more erratic and small in comparison to like the grandiosity of them, that statement makes a lot of sense to me now. Like, it just lands in a deeper part of my body now. And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a big function of, like, a precursor to my depression is getting overwhelmed and really, what's the word, disillusioned with the human experience. And that's been a constant throughout my life, is like, I don't feel human. I don't want to be here as a human. I don't like this. Yeah. And so that experience will get so overwhelming that I have to just leave my body for a bit. And I think maybe one of the things that I'm trying to do is be a tree, or like have more of that like interconnected experience, because I think like the consciousness of trees is very shared in a way that humans, we just don't function that way all the time.
Yeah,
like we can have those moments, definitely, and I think we're learning to lean into that more.
Yeah.
But definitely that's not what we're taught to do in America.
Good God, no.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
And like those moments of having that interconnectedness are pretty rare. They were very rare for me until like after I moved back to the West Coast, like in my early 20s. Yeah, so I was like trying maybe to have some semblance of like, oh, if I'm not trapped in this singular human body, then maybe I can have this more expansive, more interconnected experience. And maybe I got that and just didn't, like, I don't have the memory of that because I was disassociated, and that's not how human memory works.
Yeah.
But I think there's also something to, I think probably I chose to be human this lifetime, and there's
so
something to that, and there's only so much I can step outside of human consciousness while I'm on this particular journey.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating, but just is what it is.
Yeah. I imagine.
Yeah. And then I was disassociating a lot. I was living in Boston and had some really dramatic shit happen in my life, and had just a breakdown essentially, and ran away to the woods. I moved back to Washington and moved to Olden Village, which is a Lutheran retreat center, so kind of coming back to the church a little bit, but it's also just this weird hippie village in the Northern Cascades. It's very, very remote, and you walk out your door and you're in the mountains.
It's amazing.
And it's beautiful, and I just...
You're in your happy place.
Needed to be there. Yeah. So I had that cleansing and that reminder of like, oh yeah, okay. I need to be around trees. If I'm going to live in a city, I need to be really careful about it. And just kind of was able to ground, and I think because I had this, like, I was in a very spiritual place. It's like Lutheran, but it was still very, really thinking about, again, those grander questions, and those, like, looking below this like surface level of what humans are. And surrounded by trees and mountains talking to me all the time, and like got to hear all of that again. Yeah.
What is it like for you? So can you describe what it's like to how you receive what, like, how that manifests for you in like physical ways?
Sure.
Because you, like, you know, people will be like, I talked to, and also we're gonna go back to this because clearly you said this and like it's a big deal of like, B sees ghosts all the time. Let's have B close this crazy portal we just opened.
Just casually.
But you know, no big deal. What has it historically been like for you, and what is it like for you now to be able to talk to plants and mountains? Like, is it a actual conversation like you and I are having right now? Like, what is the physical process for you?
It depends on the tree or the rocks, or it depends on the being that I'm having like a discourse with. But I'd say usually the most common is I'll get a feeling that I can't describe how it is different than other feelings. It's like kind of like being very gently tickled, but on the inside, but it's like not ticklish. Unless it's aspen trees. Aspen trees are very ticklish.
Such a good description.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like
my head is being saying, I'm like, what? Huh? Oh.
And then I'll get words or music, or like sometimes I'll get smells, or not smells exactly, but like that kind of like taste smell, back of the throat, nose area.
Yeah.
And just kind of like intuitive feelings.
Yeah.
More than anything else. And then I'll get, if I pay attention to that, then sometimes I'll get like actual words in my head, or I'll like hear kind of whispery voices, or I'll get little movie clips in my brain.
Okay, yeah.
I don't ever see anything outside of myself visually, but I get little like head movies a lot.
Is that true as well with spirits of humans who have passed? Is it also, do you see them, or is it a felt sense auditory thing?
It's usually more of a felt sense. I will see them like out of the corner of my eye. I get that all the time, where I'll like very much, I'll like for sure see someone or something. Not just humans. There's definitely certain like spirits that are more, I don't know, corporeal or something. And I'll see them, and then I'll turn my head and nothing is there. Yeah. And there's like nothing there that my eye could have turned into something, you know? And then if I like focus on that spot, sometimes I can actually see them. And I wonder if that's something that would have been stronger if I hadn't been like shutting down really clear, like visual and auditory hallucinations. Like what would have been considered hallucinations for sure.
Because they were louder and stronger for you, like much more visual when you were younger.
I think so. Yeah.
And clearly pre-verbal.
Right.
I imagine it'd be very different if that had been completely okay for you to just engage with that.
Yeah. And I've definitely had classes where that was like the point was to try to
open that
gift up. Yeah. And I've had visuals like in meditation classes, but did not pursue it for whatever reason. I think it just freaked me out, I guess. Not consciously, but I think there's still some fear there.
Yeah, that's understandable. I was just going to ask, do you ever feel, because, you know, essentially all the scary movies, all the thing, right? Like we're in the season of all the scary movies, which personally I used to love when I was young, and now I'm like, I can't do it. But I've also been binging on some really random stuff that is like along those lines, but not terrifying. I don't know what's going on with me right now. It's very entertaining. The Halloween freak in me is going bigger this year than normal. Probably because I'm not having a party.
Right.
But I guess, you know, Hollywood has definitely portrayed the whole dynamic of it always being terrifying. Even when it's not terrifying, it's always terrifying, right? Like, they're always turning into, like, the scary moment when the ghost is right there, and you're like, oh, it's always have to be, like, looking so dead and creepy, and, you know, all the things. And so, is there ever an element for you where it's unsettling, or where it is really scary because you're like, oh shit, I know there's someone or something, and also, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to eat my lunch right now.
Yeah. Not really anymore, because I think I'm really used to it, and I have been working for, like, consciously around this stuff for long enough. I have really substantial barriers and boundaries and protections going all the time, and I have very specific beings that I work with that are geared towards that, and I also have my brother, who, I mean, I think that maybe is also one of the reasons maybe why I am more comfortable with my abilities and didn't get as freaked out that, like, maybe I might have schizophrenia, because I had my brother Casey, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had a real rough time of it. He just, like, believed in me. And would talk to me about his experience of things, and, like, he had some sense that what was going on for him and what was going on for me was not just, like, he wasn't just crazy. And there was stuff about the way that showed up for him that was really not okay for him and made his life very difficult, and that wasn't the same for me. But I don't know, I think he had his own experience and went very, like, he's my big brother, so he was very protective of me, and would protect me, like, in my dreams. And then he passed when I was 21, I guess. And I remember very clearly several dreams I had leading up to that, and then dreams of him afterwards. And there was this very clear, like, both a, like, passing of knowledge and kind of family position, and also I'm with you forever. And I still talk to him and see him all the time. The time. And he's a very constant and fierce protector for the entities and spirits, and, like, ghosts that used to fuck with me. I just don't have those experiences anymore. And that almost completely stopped after he died.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think he's a big piece of that. But I absolutely have had, like, when I was younger, and definitely from about, I'd say, like, 11 to 16 or so, was rough with seeing ghosts that were, like, pretty violent and, like, definitely freaked me out. I had multiple experiences of just being, like, really scared.
Violent in what way? Like, they visually, it was terrifying, or they were actually, like, engaging with you?
Visually, but then I started having night terrors that were, guy was being murdered, and like ripped apart in my dreams most nights. Jesus. And then I'd wake up with bruises and cuts and shit like that. And I also started, like, sleepwalking at that time, and there was a particular ghost that was somehow attached to the basement bathroom that was, like, my bathroom. That I like woke up in the shower, or not in the shower. I woke up knowing that, like, I had showered in my sleep.
Oh my God.
And yeah, so there's like stuff like that was happening that was really freaky. And I don't know how much of that was like teenage hormone shifting and actually like night terrors and sleepwalking. Like that's a thing that happens.
Yeah.
And how much of that was ghosts messing with me or whatever
or
entities.
the combination of all of the above.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was also just like a really bad time for me mental health wise, and I was being pretty destructive, so I think there's also stuff there of, you know, if
What
you
kind
have
of
powers
energy you're calling
and you're
in.
being destructive, like you're calling in some shit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I was gonna say again, like another reason, you know, as you're talking about the ghost in the bathroom, like another reason to like clear house energy, and another reason to like always be doing like your own shielding all the time, right? Like I'm just always kind of coming back to that in this podcast of always clear your space energy, always clear your own energy, always do your shielding, because even if you are not as sensitive as someone like B, that shit still affects you in ways that you don't even realize.
yeah.
And I can't imagine, like, I think about, again, going back to, like, that mental health thing of, like, how many young kids are just struggling with things that they haven't verbalized because they're afraid of being stigmatized. If we could just help hold some shit down for them and, like, teach them some ways of energetically actually being clear. One day we'll get there.
One day.
One day.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. Okay, let's take a little break and we'll come back in a minute. So before I move forward with the rest of this episode, I just want to take a quick moment to talk to you about Anchor FM. It is the site that I've been doing this podcast from. And I want to let you all know that if any of you are out there and thinking about creating your own podcast, this is a great place to do it from. First of all, it's free, and Lord knows free is a good price. Also, it has a lot of really sweet options and tools to help you create the podcast without having to navigate your own recording software or any sort of editing software. You basically can do it all specifically from Anchor FM, so it makes it really easy. And then the beauty of it is once you're done, you hit upload, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you to majority of the listening sites out there, which is really great and simple. Really, it's a super easy thing to do. So if you have any interest in that, you should go to your app store and download the Anchor app for free, or go to anchor.fm and check it out. Again, that's ANCHOR.fm. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Okay, we are back. We were just saying how there is so much to this conversation. There's so many things, so many directions we could go with this. But I guess I do want to, where do I want to go? I don't know. I know that like from that place of, you were talking about how you had kind of gotten into this like kind of dark place, and then you moved to Holden and were around the trees and the mountains again, and that kind of shifted some things for you. Mm-hmm. And then, do you want to move forward from there to kind of where we are today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So that, like, right as I left Holden was also when my brother passed. It's like right at the same time. And I couch surfed down the West Coast to find a place to live. And Portland was the place.
Town?
Yeah. And I, like, had a few experiences before I lived here where I went to this group Reiki thing with with Victor, who would then become my partner when I moved to Portland. And I didn't know what Reiki was. And the person who was facilitating it was like, whoa, something really big is coming through for you. Like, excuse me, who are you? Random stranger? Like, what's going on here?
Yet another person who's like, you're amazing. What is going on?
Yeah. It makes me so uncomfortable.
Sorry.
I do get that. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to rephrase this. Maybe this will help. Right, so B does a ton of work with crystals. You work with them, I feel like, all the time.
Yeah.
I thought you looked at me like you were going to be like, not really. And I was going to be who
I
are
don't
you?
Work with them. I just like live with them. They're just around me always. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, right? So this is the difference, right? Like, people would be like, you work with this thing, and B doesn't work with the things. B just engages and interacts with the things, right? It's like the same with plants. People would be like, you have so many plants, and you're like, no, God, I'm caretaking and living with and engaging with my friends, right? Like, there's that. You are essentially the thing that you many times say you would rather be, of like, you would rather be a tree, but I think of you of like a crystal, right? You're like, it's like when people are like, whoa, do you feel the energy coming off of this stone? It's mind-blowing. That's kind of like a better way of talking about you, because there's something about the quiet, and I don't say quiet as in like you're such a meek and quiet person, but you do have, you present in a way that, I mean, like, there is a way that you present that is very like quiet, and reserved is not the word, but contained, again in quotes, because I'm just fucking up with all my words tonight. Like, I'm not, none of them are coming.
We maybe don't have words for it that don't sound judgmental.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah. Because there's a way in which you move through the world that is, because there is like a quietness to you, there's such a strong presence at the same time. And I think anyone who, like, I think of myself as someone who is kind of a watcher. I watch and read scenes a lot, and I read people, and it doesn't always present in that way, but that's usually what I'm doing. And I remember when I first met you, and I was just, whoa, what? Like, there's just a feeling to you, and it is similar to like when you, oh, crystals are amazing things, they're so cool, right? People are always like, they're so pretty, and then the day that you touch a crystal and you actually feel it and you're like, what the fuck? That's kind of like how you are. Like, that's maybe the better way, where it's like you can just feel that there's like this different energetic presence with you that I think is because you have a different access to spirit realm that not everyone has, or doesn't have it in this at the same level that you do. Like, you resonate at a different realm than a lot of other people do. And I think it's a felt thing that anyone who it's intimidating is what it was for me when I first met you, because there was that like, what is that?
Yeah.
But also it's pretty intriguing and kind of like, what does that mean, and what does that look like, and what is happening for this person? Like, what is their life like? And your life is talking to plants and living with crystals and speaking with mountains and also seeing dead people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the feedback I get the most from like random strangers or like people I don't really know that well is either intimidating or mysterious. Mysterious I get the most, and it's usually with this, and I want to like know you, I want to solve your mystery type of
which I can
vibes.
see you being like, no, like, go away,
no. You don't get to. Fuck off. Yeah.
So what occurred? Did anything like crazy occur with this Reiki dynamic?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry,
so,
I totally sidetracked. Fangirling still.
I had just this really intense visualization and like download from, I think, just the earth. How it presented at the time was Gaia. It's like the words that got labeled to it, but I don't really use that word, so I don't know where that came from. And it was, I was in Eugene at the time, and the plan was to go to Portland. And it was just like, yep, you have to go to Portland and you have to keep doing these things. And it wasn't a super clear message. It was just this very grounded, present energy of, yes, this, keep doing this. And this was like, I guess, seeking spiritual teaching. Because then I moved to Portland and I met Danielle. And she had just had her kid and needed someone to come to work with her and watch her kid. And I'd been a nanny for over like a decade at that point. And she offered multiple different payment formats of like, I can pay you some now or do some like partial trade. I'm an esthetician. I do Reiki. I could like give you services, or also I teach Reiki and I could attune you. And I still didn't know what Reiki was and was like, yeah, attune me to do Reiki.
Yeah, let's do this.
Let's do that. I don't know what this is, but yeah, I don't have any money or a like place to stay. Like I have a place to stay, but I don't have a like house, and I really need a job, but yeah, train me to do Reiki. And that's a thing that has happened with me a lot, where I like don't really know what I'm doing when I'm doing it, but I'm just like, this is the thing that I'm doing. And then that, through her, I met you and the rest of our coven, and I just kept saying yes to teachers. That's also how I met Tatiana, who ended up being an incredibly influential teacher in my life. And yeah, I guess, and that's how I got hooked up with like the Wild Woman event, and that's through that event, I think that's how I really found my like more public voice as a priestess, and stepped into this realm of doing meditations for people and holding rituals for people and doing guided underworld journeys, and just kind of unfolded into whatever it is I am now. And yeah, that process over the last 8 years or so that I've lived in Portland has mostly just been me saying yes as I go along to the various opportunities that have presented themselves. And some of that is, like listening and honing that, cultivating that reciprocal experience, I think. So reciprocity is a huge thing for me. That's like a core belief, a core like guidepost in how I live my life and how I choose what I engage with is like, does this have the potential to be a reciprocal relationship? And if the answer is no, I'm probably not going to pursue it that much.
Yeah.
And so I think that in the realm of woo, which I don't know, there's some really like toxic stuff in the magical world, just like any other, we exist in the same macro colonial capitalist white supremacist patriarchal, all that nonsense.
Humans being
humans, and that comes through and in these like magic circles. And so I think having that guidepost of is this practice reciprocal has helped me like only find things that resonate with me, but also I think I haven't had a lot of dead ends with my spiritual practice. I don't feel like I haven't had that experience that I talk to people sometimes and they've had this really like jaded experience where they really invested into something and then got disillusioned somewhere along the way. And I think there's a lot of that in kind of like the like white woo world, where there's a lot of practices that are like, they're not there for your spiritual betterment, they're there for money or ego or whatever it is. Fear, a lot of fear.
What do you mean by that?
Ooh, yeah. So this gets into another philosophy that I'm sitting with of cultural rootlessness in America, and like what colonialism has done to white folks. And how there's just this like deep hunger that I've heard referred to as
hungry ghosts.
Yeah, that like I'm gonna mess this up, but it's like Wendigo spirit. I'm blanking out, but Robin, writer of
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Braiding Sweetgrass. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she talks about it in her book. And I'm forgetting the exact phrasing, but that kind of touches on what I'm talking about. Is this just like spiritual, cultural gulf that exists? And I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of pain wrapped up in that experience. And I think I see a lot of folks trying to heal that, trying to fill that, trying to do whatever they can to respond to or react to like that feeling. And so I guess that's what I mean maybe by like looking at some of the more hollow spiritual practices that I see offered and seeing a lot of fear there, is that it's this fear of, I know I'm not connected and it's painful and I'm afraid I'll always be this way, and so I need to try anything at all that's offering connectivity, anything that's offering the antidote to this feeling. Yeah.
Which, you know, on one level, like, fingers crossed, people, it's like starting them on a path that they then wake up and realize, like, what the fuck is happening for them, and then actually access what is a true path for them. On another level, gross. Yeah, and a place where I think globally, hopefully, but in particular here in the States, we're starting on a bigger level to like wake up to and start to like really acknowledge and address, and people are starting to take a step back from the things that they're like grasping at and clinging to, and starting to be like, wait a minute, let me like have some integrity and really look at myself in this, and choose to start moving down a path that feels more true to who I am and true to my ancestry and true to like digging into what were practices before colonialism ruined so much.
Yeah.
But also it's complicated and complex.
Deeply.
Yeah.
Deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's like that guidepost of reciprocity also built into that is this understanding that like I have to show up too. I have to give of my gifts and like respect myself and what I offer enough to trust that I have a place in this, and that on some level I am needed, or like humans are needed, and that for a spiritual practice to be nourishing in the way that we want it to be, it can't just be taking. We have to also give of ourselves. And
absolutely.
It's like cyclical in that nature. And that's not something that, you know, Christian Western culture has language for, really. And it's definitely not something that I saw being taught. Like, my bio dad, his family, like, they're Catholic, and I went to a Catholic school, weirdly.
It's very hard for me to picture
and that. Yeah, it was like a weird fluke, but it happened. And that's, you know, I didn't grow up in that, but that's a great example of this culture of fear and guilt that teaches us that we are nothing. And this spiritual practice is what makes us something.
Right.
And that is so toxic, both, you know, for our own selves and our souls, but it also teaches us to like absolve ourselves of responsibility in some ways.
Yeah.
It teaches us to offload our entire spiritual practice onto some nebulous something that's supposed to give us all.
Well, I think it creates a really painful paradigm of like you devalue yourself and also like devalue your own worth, but also absolve yourself at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you're either like shitting all over who you are and you're feeling guilty and shame, or you're like, oh, this is the thing that will make me all of the things, and if I just, you know, do it all perfectly and right, then maybe I can be all the things and be deemed worthy in the eyes of God, or whatever. And it's like a lose-lose in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it feels painful.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel the need to say, since this is on a podcast, I do think there are ways to go about Christianity, and I've like witnessed
absolutely
and have several people in my life that are devoutly Christian and are really reciprocal about it, and it's like it brings them this like holistic spiritual fulfillment. In my experience, I don't think that's the norm, but I'd love to be proven wrong about that, but it is what it is.
I'm gonna hold my tongue right now. I've talked enough about that on many episodes. Again, like, I love that I'm like, I'm gonna hold my tongue, and here I go. Like, you know, I think like what I always come back to is like at the core of really any spiritual practice, it is really about kind of having a reciprocal relationship of like of give and take, and that it's based in love, essentially, and that it's based in wanting to honor other people as much as we honor ourselves, and want to be honored and to be respected and to be seen and to be held and to be loved and be cared for. And that it is the kind of reciprocal relationship that allows for that to grow and be a beautiful practice. And that is at the core, like, I believe that is really at the core of any spiritual practice, essentially. And then we lose that in the like structure and the form of the church, putting in the big capitals. And it gets misconstrued, and I think it gets misconstrued. It can also get misconstrued in other religions that are not Christianity, and other you know, in some indigenous practices that have also gotten like tweaked in these fucking weird ways, and that there can be humans again being human, being the like going through the shit that they go through. Like there's power dynamics, and there's the many things that like warp people and their practices, but coming from that like reciprocal place and remembering like it is a give and take, not one or the other, is so powerful and healing.
It is. It can be. It's hard to hold sometimes. That's but I think that's for me. There's, you know, I have indigenous ancestry, and I'm very cut off from that, like as far as my present day active cultural access, I would say. And I'm coming back to that through this weird academic lens, but have like this great gift of being able to learn from indigenous teachers, which I if there are Native Studies programs at schools, it's not the norm that you actually get to learn from an indigenous person.
Sadly, true of African studies usually too.
It's across the board.
It's always like an old white dude. It's so weird. So weird and problematic.
Yes. Yeah. But I guess I recognize that this idea of reciprocity, like this isn't, I didn't come up with this. And I'm not sure like how that got in there so early. Like there must have been some influences that I just don't remember from my family, or maybe, you know, from the trees and the mountains and the just like being as having always listened to those beings and always had this notion of like, no, trees are people, like rocks are people, animals are people. Like that has never made sense to me, that like hierarchy. Kind of getting tangential, but
that's okay. No,
I think there's this combination of, there's these philosophies that I don't remember being taught them, but I did get taught them. And they're very indigenous philosophies, and indigenous ways of looking at the world. And right now I'm going through this like very heady and confusing and weird, painful process of reconciling with, like, you know, my settler ancestors, and like, what does it mean to be a like indige queer white presenting witch?
Yeah.
Also be going to school for psychology and engaging in this academia world and like learning about my own culture, but like from this removed academic lens, because I don't actually have direct access to that culture because of weird family dynamics. And so that's all something that I'm like deeply in active process with. And I'm like, if I say anything on here, I'm gonna have major anxiety about it because I just don't know. I'm like not settled in any of this right now.
Yeah, that's understandable.
But that's, you know, I have to recognize that that's absolutely there. Like that, the way that I approach spirituality is absolutely informed by like my indigenous ancestry.
Yeah.
And also probably my Norwegian ancestry. I just like haven't poked at that as much, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel as important.
Do you feel like you haven't poked at it as much or haven't poked at it as much lately?
Yeah. Like right now I'm going to school for Native Studies, and so of course that's what I'm looking at more. I also think Emily, one of our other coven members, she's going real hard on like Norse roots stuff, and I feel like I'm like, okay, cool, you can do some of that right now, and I can benefit from that a little bit, which, you know, thank you, Emily. And I think I also I did have access to Norwegian culture. I mean, it was like Norwegian immigrant culture, but that's, you know, my stepdad is, I guess, first generation. I grew up with his parents very much in my life, and I think there's just been, that has been less repressed, that side of myself. And so it doesn't feel as important to dig into because I was always able to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'll come back around to that. And I think there's also it's just like too much to do at the same time.
Oh God, yeah.
You know, of course, in the Norse roots, there's all of this like white supremacy garbage to sort out from that.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah. But I know that I'm not going to be able to dive into that without like really parsing out all of that. So that's another task for another day.
Yeah. So on that note, I know that things have shifted a lot for you lately, in particular because you are kind of stepping down this pathway of Native studies and it being very much an academic pathway. But I imagine it's also shifting some of your kind of spiritual practices. What does a typical day look like for you? Are there any things you do every day that you feel like are a part of your spiritual practice?
I talk to my plants every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like say hi to my plants in the morning, or I don't know, my plants, that feels weird, but the plants that I live with. And that's like a process that I go through every day, is like saying hi, like good morning, and checking in, and what do you need, and that kind of process. And usually there's like some rocks that want to be moved around. I have 20 altars in my house, various sizes. And like all of my window ledges are altars, and yes. I have like an actual, they're all actual, but I have a like big active altar that, I guess just a piece of furniture that's all it is. It's my grandma's hutch. And
this is also another reason why I love Bee and loved living with Bee, because I was like, yes, altars everywhere. You are like me in that way. Can we have them every place possible?
Yeah. And yeah, that's always something that I've done my whole life, is just like arranging objects just so.
Yes.
And I come at that from multiple angles. That's also, I've got interior decorators in my family, and that's a big deal, how stuff is arranged in a space. Yeah, so I guess that's maybe part of it, is just kind of checking in with my altars and all of the other like beings that I have in my space. And like, you know, sometimes people want to go outside, sometimes people want to be on a different shelf, and it's just kind of depends. And then other than that, I don't know, I go in waves of being more or less, I'd say, active in what I would label as like an actual practice. And there's been periods in my life where I'm like, I got multiple rituals that I'm got going on, or like spells that I got going on, or there's like specific meditation practices or like energy clearing practices that I'll do every day. But right now I'm kind of running on autopilot. There's definitely some like energetic clearing stuff that I have done enough times that it's like an automatic process for my body to go through, and I have like guides that help me with that. So instead of having to go through an entire protocol.
Let me say, by guides, we're not talking about personal humans in life. We're talking about other dimensional, like, or
energetic guides.
Yeah.
And mine mostly show up as like crystal matrices. Yeah. Sort of. They're like these weird little, kind of like the soot sprites in Totoro, but bigger and not black. They're like different colors.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's these like energetic beings that I've been working with now for like almost a decade. That a lot of that stuff I learned with Tatiana, and some of her like light work practices.
Yeah.
She is amazing at creating really clear step-by-step protocols that I have done enough times now that I have like a shorthand for it, essentially. So like there's cord cutting that I probably do cord cutting and clearing and like verbal clearing every day, but I just don't notice I'm doing it because it's so automatic. Yeah. And it's so, there's something stuck there, and like, okay, quick, I'm just gonna cut this cord.
Because I've seen you do it.
Yeah, I do like weird things with my hands and like make snap a lot, or like make clicking sounds or whatever. It looks kind of strange from the outside, but
if you know what's happening, right? Like when I see you do it, I'm like, oh yeah, B's just doing a clearing right now. Like I know exactly what's happening, but I imagine someone who doesn't is like, what the fuck is going on right there?
Yeah, so that kind of stuff, as I'm just going about my day and I like notice that something is stuck, I'll like clear it, or the verbal processing is something that I do. My particular mental health makeup comes with a lot of really like fucked up thoughts, and I have a lot of negative thoughts floating through my brain all the time, and so a lot of the times throughout my day I'll like catch myself thinking a thing and then try to like find the root of, I think of them as programs, like mental programs. Try to like find the root of that, or just like say, like catch that thought and just like, okay, wherever that's coming from, like let's destroy and uncreate that. And then there's like a whole protocol that I go through that
I love that.
Is very quick, because I've done it a bunch of times. Learning it's not so quick, but
it's a process like anything, and it takes perpetual consistent practice. And there are times where like I have to be really honest with myself and like, okay, are you just like, did you actually get that, or are you just being lazy right now? Like so sometimes I will run into something that I'm like, okay, I have to like actually sit down and work on this one. But because so much of mine is absolutely like a neurodivergence piece to it, so this is just kind of how my brain works, and I have to like constantly be like pulling these brain weeds. And it's way less than when I started working with Tatiana. What's Tatiana's last name? Does she do
Sakurai?
Yeah. Can you spell that off the top of your head?
I could try, but I don't know that it would be correct.
Only because I think Tatiana could be a great reference for other folks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she has written a book at this point and compiled her beautiful wisdom into a tome. I can send you the information, so...
I can also... I can put it in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, because that's a real valuable book, for sure.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, she's taken several different light healing and, like, energy healing modalities and combined them in this fantastic way. Yeah, so my day-to-day looks pretty normal, except for, you know, randomly I'll, like, flail my hands about or mutter some clearing protocol under my breath or, like, clap really loud.
Yeah. Yeah, sound's a big one for you.
Yeah. Yes, sound is a huge one for me.
Yeah.
I'm very auditory, both, like, in my magic practice, and I'd say that like shows up in my neurodivergence, and just some of my, the stim stuff that I gravitate towards, and some of my tics are very auditory.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain what stimming is for those people who don't know?
Yeah, sure. Stimming is just, so we all need sensory stimulation. Some of us need more or less, and we all like different kinds. So stimming is just a word for all those little tics that we do. So like chewing your nails is stimming, or I'm like, for autism, one of the obvious or more noted ones is like hand flapping, which is something I'm doing more and more, which is interesting to notice. I didn't do that a lot. I didn't used to, or I don't know if I did it as a kid. I should ask.
Yeah.
But so like for me, I do like trilling sounds. Like I'll go a lot, just like randomly throughout my day. Or like snapping, or like rubbing your hands together. Yeah, there's 1,010,000 different forms of stimming, and that is a common thing to hear talked about for people who are like on the autism spectrum or have ADHD, but it's just something all humans do.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people haven't heard the term or don't have a reference for what it means.
Totally.
So I love that I was like, this is all going to be about death magic, and we barely talked anything about it, which is just so funny and so good, because I was like, it's the perfect time to interview B. It's all around the holiday. It's all around liminal time. So this is my next question for you is, because you do, and you have always kind of had a much stronger connection to ghosts and people who've passed and non-corporeal beings. Mm-hmm. What is your take on, we think of Samhain, or other people would associate that with Halloween or Dia de los Muertos, this portion of fall in particular, of this time that is a much more liminal space where the veil is thin and we have more access to ancestors and those who have passed. And I would love to know your take on that, since you kind of essentially, your magic is in the liminal spaces and, in the world of opening and closing portals and, doing journeys to the underworld, which I would also love to know what that kind of looks like for you. Yeah, what is your take on this time in particular? Does it feel any different to you, or is it kind of, same?
Yeah. There are things that I know are different. Like I can tell that more people have access to that whatever the veil is, it is thinner. Mm-hmm. Like I do think that is something that's happening at this time of year, but for me personally, there's not that much of a difference. because I'm like always in that realm, at least a little bit. Okay, so my experience of like the veil being thin and having like, I don't know, spirits coming at me all the time, that does have an ebb and a flow to it throughout the year. And this is the beginning of that like ramping up. And then it doesn't really chill out until May. And I'd say from like Halloween to Beltane is like a wild ride. Yeah. All the time. Yeah. And I've just gotten used to it. Yeah. And so it's like if I step away from it, I can recognize like, oh, this is kind of, there's a lot going on. But I don't experience it as being like that weird, or it doesn't feel like that wild to me. Right. And I think it's more of, there's like an uptick of people asking me about their dead relatives, or there is an uptick in like seeing whoever out of the corner of my eye and then like kind of keying into things. And when I was doing energy work more professionally, there was just like more people would seek me out around this time. And that was something I learned from Tatiana really early in working with her and learning about entities, was that as an energetic practitioner, it's a really good idea to set business hours for yourself with entities specifically. And like you can say like, these are my hours, and you're only allowed to interact with me if you bring me a client. And so I had that going pretty strong.
We had that same conversation with Aisha in the episode with her. I think was episode 2 of the season. Open for business, close for business.
Yep.
Like,
yeah.
Gotta set those hours.
You gotta. Otherwise they will find you all the time. All the time.
Yeah, that's not what you want.
No.
What kind of things, like when people ask you questions, like what kind of work are you doing were you doing, or possibly will be doing when working with the dead? Like, what does that look like for you? What is that?
It's mostly talking to them, like my work, I guess. I haven't really thought about this. This is not something I've ever like charged money for. The stuff I have done more professionally, I'd say, is pretty strictly just like energy work, like pretty akin to Reiki, or like pranic healing. But through that, usually people have an ancestor or like some being that's come with them, and I'm like listening to them. Listening is accurate, but it's more like getting those like mind movie messages. It's like much more I get kind of confusing packets of information that have like smells and sounds and colors attached to them, and somehow my brain turns that into something I can understand. And it's mostly just witnessing, honestly. Like a lot of the time it's just like hearing them and discerning like, what do you need, what do you want, like why are you talking to me, why are you here? And usually through that process, that's enough. And sometimes there'll be like, I need to go to this place, or like I want sugar cookies, or like whatever.
I need an offering, damn it.
Yeah. Sometimes there'll be something like that. And I'd say I get more pulled in when there's a place attached to it, where it's like a house or land that other people will, ghosts and spirits. I'm really not sure what word to use, right? Because it's so much is going on there that I don't know what to label all of them. But yeah, I they do come to me as individuals, But I get the strongest stuff when it's like I walk into a building and like, oh shit, there's stuff happening here. And so
in the sense of you can feel multiple energies, or like it feels like it's a portal place, or that because, oh, there's a person here and they've got something going down.
Whatever it is, if there's a portal, I feel a portal. If there's it just depends on what's going on.
Yeah, and maybe we should clarify what that means. Like, what would you describe a portal as being?
Yeah, portals are just an energetic door, which is kind of a duh statement, I think. Portals are just like portals, you know? They're just little doors or shortcuts, maybe. If there are, which I think probably there are, multiple dimensions and like many layers to this existence, then portals are sometimes like little like shortcuts between them, or like in the case of so like the ridiculous Ouija board experience, we for sure opened a portal,
right? And
when I say that, we opened a fucking like hole in the air, and I like could not see it if I looked directly at it, but I could kind of get the like out of the corner of my eye glimpse, and I could feel it, and it just felt like, and these are the ones where I'm like, this is scary, we gotta close this. And where I'd say like it's like more problematic style of portal, where it the feeling of it is like a hungry void, but also, okay, I'm a big nerd and love Lord of the Rings and have loved Lord of the Rings like my whole life, and it's like they did it well in the movie, but the scene where the dwarves live in the first book, I'm blanking on all of the words, whatever, but like they're like going through the mountain and the drums start happening, because it's not Pippin in the books, but in the movies it's Pippin, poor boy, gets blamed for everything, that he drops the corpse down the well, and then you hear the drums throughout the mountain, and you just know that doom is coming, like danger is looming, and they're gonna come through that fucking door, because that's the only door in this room, and like that feeling is always,
that's terrifying,
like merged with this experience for me, because I read those books really young, so I had that like imagery in my head. That's why I brought that up, because this happens in my brain a lot, where I like have some